Hey, this is Dr. Chad Kish. Welcome to KINE 1331, Physical Education for the Elementary Teacher. This is a video lecture for lesson planning, and this is part one. There will be two parts in this module and the next module of this video lecture for lesson planning. When you watch a video lecture, it's important to actively watch this video lecture. That means act like you're in a classroom setting. Take some notes. Don't just try to take pictures of slides or anything like that. Actually get a notebook out, take some notes along the way. You can pause this if you miss anything and you need to write some things down. Try to be free of distractions and plan yourself about an hour to watch each of the three video lectures for this course. All right, so actively watch, take notes, and this material for this video lecture is critical for the assignments in this module, as well as the Unit 3 culminating activity of developing a lesson plan. So what are we going to do today? We're going to start by learning how to write a three-part performance objective for a physical education activity. So there are three specific parts. It's important to make your performance objective something that is actually observable. All right, so if you've heard of a performance objective before in some of your education classes, you'll have a little background knowledge. If not, we'll walk you through the entire process. So when you're thinking about this, you need to have an activity in mind that you would like to teach an elementary physical education class that you want to write a lesson plan for and develop an instructional video for. So you might want to pause the video and think of something you would teach to an elementary physical education class. That'd be kindergarten through 6th grade. And then as you're doing the activities in the following modules, do the activities based on that specific idea or concept. So what is a performance objective? The purpose of a performance objective is to first provide teachers with some kind of direction for the lesson. A performance objective provides a specific purpose for the lesson or activity, as well as it gives you an idea of what you want to assess at the end of the lesson. Next, you want to provide a foundation for designing your lesson concept. This really serves as a guide for you as the teacher to design your lesson, develop your scope and sequence of activities. That's basically what you're going to teach, to the extent, the order of things you will teach. Are you going to demonstrate it? Are you going to have guided practice? Will you do whole versus part teaching? You'll learn all of that information in Unit 3 and Unit 4. And then third, you want to demonstrate to the students what's expected of them for this unit and what students will learn or do. That really, your performance objective explains to the students what they're going to do in class today. In an elementary PE class, the first question students ask when they come in the door is, what are we going to do today? In most school districts now, they want that performance objective written on some kind of whiteboard or blackboard or really detailed in your lesson plan. There are three important criteria for performance objectives. And these criteria are different than the three parts. The three important criteria really help you write it. First of all, it must be observable. You must be able to see that the students are able to do what your performance objective is. Next, it needs to be measurable. All right? By measurable, what does that mean? We must be able to evaluate and assess it. Words like learn, how can you really measure learn? Or understand, that's hard to measure that. We might be able to say students are able to do a certain thing, all right? Or able to complete the activity with a certain, using correct form. So it needs to be measurable. And number three, it needs to be attainable. So we must consider the skill level of our students, and we need to find a way to make it challenging enough to keep students engaged and challenged and working towards a goal, but don't make it too hard that students can't be successful. So you have to know your students a little bit when you're writing your criteria for your performance objective. All right, so let's learn a little bit more about performance objectives. First of all, this could be a performance objective. Students will learn to get open to receive a pass. All right, the objective really needs improvement. It's not measurable or observable. Learn is not one of those observable words. Let me give you an example of one that's a little bit better. While working cooperatively in groups, students will be able to develop 2 ways to get open to receive a pass and demonstrate those skills to class. This is a much more detailed performance objective. You might tell students when they ask, what are we going to do today? We're going to learn to get open to receive a pass. But your lesson objective will be written more in a form like this with different parts and be very detailed. All right. So let's talk about the language of performance objectives briefly. There are non-observable words. We want to stay away from these. Develop, grasp, learn, and understand. Those are really hard to observe or assess. Observable words in your performance objective would be words such as apply, demonstrate, design, define, discuss, execute, identify, complete, or perform. These are things in a PE class that students can actually do, and you can observe them and then set up some assessment to be able to see if the students were able to do them. So, there are 3 parts in writing a performance objective. These are different than the 3 criteria. These are 3 specific parts. There's the task, the condition, and the criteria. So what does each one of these mean? When you see a performance objective written, you'll see the task, comma, the condition, comma, and then the criteria in one kind of sentence. It might be a little bit of a run-on sentence. So the task, let's define that. It's what you want students to do, right? This could be dribble a ball. If you're doing tumbling, it could be perform a forward roll. Or if you're doing a team building activity, it could be work together to construct, all right? So the task is really what you're going to tell the students. We're going to learn to dribble the ball today. Now the condition is how the students are going to perform the task. Are they going to dribble the ball between a set of cones? All right. Are they going to go down the floor? Is it going to be with a partner or against an opponent? All right. So the condition is how they're going to do that. Could it be with correct form? That's critical sometimes in the initial teaching in the elementary. You're looking more on the performance than the results. And the criteria is the third part. It's what is the standard of performance. So it's the how well are they going to do things. This might be 2 out of 3 times, 50% of the time. If you're doing dribbling down the court between cones, it could be in less than 30 seconds. So the criteria is how well you expect students to do things. So if you write a well-written performance objective, this is the basis for your assessment, which you will learn later on in the unit. So writing performance examples. Here are examples of the 3 parts. Students will be able to serve a tennis ball into the correct service court, and you could even put from the back line, the service line, or from a different area when they're elementary students, 3 out of 5 times. And this 3 out of 5 times could be 60% of the time. So what's the task? The task is the very first part. Students will be able to serve a tennis ball. What's the condition? Into the correct service court. And what's the criteria? 3 out of 5 times. The criteria might not be given to students when you first tell them what they're going to do in the class, but as you've learned what they're doing, what their skill level is, as you're going through the lesson, you'll say, okay, now we're going to assess to see if you can get this, and you'll add the criteria in. Make sure your criteria is measurable too. It needs to have some kind of number, either a time or a percentage or a number of correct completions. So here's your activity for one of the activities for this module, writing a performance objective. So think of that specific skill you might want to develop your lesson plan on and develop your instructional video for our Unit 3 and Unit 4 culminating activities. Once you think of that skill you want to teach, it's not basketball. It would be a skill, dribbling a basketball, passing a basketball. It's not softball. It would be throwing a softball or catching a softball or hitting a softball. It's a skill, not a sport. So you're going to teach a skill to an elementary level class, and then think of that, design that. It's something you need to know enough that you can teach it on a video or can research it enough to be good at it. And you want to answer the following 3 questions for that skill. What is the task? What are you going to do? Dribble a ball. What is the condition? Is it between cones? Is it against a defense without losing it? And then what is the criteria? All right. The criteria is, would it be 3 out of 5 times, 50% of the time, within 30 seconds? The only activity you cannot use, because I have the example lesson plan written, is shooting a free throw. So the example lesson plan and example video are shooting a free throw, so you need to pick any different skill you might want to teach. So use this 3-part method to write a clear and concise observable performance objective. Write the task, comma, the condition, comma, the criteria is the final part for that, but you'll break them all down in the assignment. So go to your module/assignments tab and click on writing a performance objective and complete this activity. You might want to pause the video now and do that, or you could do that on paper and pick it up later. Next, let's talk a little bit about how you need to organize a classroom and set up and use and demonstrate equipment safely. That's a critical thing that's kind of a non-instructional task. You're not teaching, but you're still planning and considering safety. So in organization and instruction, as a teacher, you need to consider the following things. How are you going to get the class's attention? How are you going to organize the class? What teaching style will you use? How will you demonstrate a skill? How will you structure your lesson for skill development and practice? These are some of the things we'll discuss here. So some non-instructional tasks include your signals. How do you get everybody's attention? You might use a whistle. Some people turn on or off music in an elementary classroom. Sometimes if the stage is connected to your gym, you might have a drum or a bell or something like that. You could use your voice, specific terms you might want to teach your class, such as freeze, stop, huddle up. If you have a loud gymnasium, you might want to consider if you have a microphone to use. A lot of different schools now have a portable sound system. Or you might use some kind of prompt, such as a clapping sequence, or when you put your hand in the air, everybody has to put their hand in the air. So make sure you have some other ideas besides just your voice, because sometimes the activities will be really loud and students won't be able to hear you. Next, it's important to consider teaching position. You need to stay in front of the class. I'll show you some various formations next, but you want to try to eliminate being in the middle of a circle of students. If you are, your back's going to be to somebody. So can everybody see you? You have a legal duty to effectively supervise your students, and elementary students especially can get very squirrely and off task. So if your back is to the middle, students seem to fiddle. But if your back is against the wall, the teacher sees all. Those are a couple little teaching cues to remember when considering teaching position. So there's various class formations. You can use a scattered formation where students are kind of offset, not necessarily in squad lines, so they can see you better. The squads is usually a preferred method when you're doing your exercises. Students are in lines. You can take roll if you need to take roll for your class, and you can have a demonstrator or the teacher in front. You can have split squads, so they're a little bit offset, all right, so they can see the teacher. All right, you can do one line, like such as line up on the baseline or sideline, but sometimes these end students get a little bit too far away, so you might want to do split lines. You might want to have one line at half court and one line at the baseline so they can see you demonstrate. Or one of the preferred methods is a semicircle. That way there's not a circle around the teacher, but these end students in line are closer to you, and students can be in a semicircle and be a little bit offset so they can see you demonstrate or explain the activity. Next, how do you organize your class? How do you get them into activity or get them into groups? You might have some kind of pre-assigned groups. You might have regular groups. You might have groups based in skill for this unit. You might put one really, really good person in each group, and then kind of the next level of students and students that aren't very good so they can help each other. or you might have specific teams for this unit. You might consider a variety of ways of grouping students. You might allow for some social justice to be integrated into class, allow some students choice. Tell them get into groups of 2 or 3, all right? You might count them off, but this takes some time, and sometimes the students will try to shuffle in order to get with their friends, all right? So you might go 1, 2, and 3. It's important to have them say the number and go to their specific spot as you're counting them off, or they'll forget what number you gave them. Once in a while, you might allow team captains and allow them to pick. You might have objects. You might just hand out a red penny, a yellow penny, a blue penny, and then as you hand them out, they can get into groups. Or you might post your groups or teams somewhere on the wall or on the door to the locker room. Equipment distribution and collection is very important. All right. Make sure you inventory equipment and prepare it prior to instruction. Make sure you have enough equipment for your class size. Make sure it's all safe and in working order, and you know where it is in your equipment closet. Stuff isn't packed in front of it, so you have to dig it out while your classroom's there. Consider your safety of the equipment. It's important to safely demonstrate that equipment and discuss it with your students and have it documented on your lesson plan in case somebody gets hurt. Do you get it before or after instruction? All right. The preferred way is to place your equipment out around the perimeter of the class so students can see it and get to it easy, but it not be a distraction and be handed out right next to each person. All right, you have to remember transitions are critical. You want students to go from instruction to the equipment to the activity quickly. If it's a distraction, you might need to store it somewhere else. If students come in, you'll have to put some classroom routines and rules down where they can't get equipment until you give them a certain cue. Then how do you distribute it? All right, if you have to store it somewhere else, not around the perimeter, do you let the team captain or a star student or a selected student come get it for their group? Do you have everybody go get it? All right, remember that could slow down your transition time as well. All right, remember it's important to consider the safety for equipment. Anytime you have some kind of stick, students in the elementary level like to turn that into a sword-to-sword fight. All right, so we need to consider our safety, give them demonstrations, instructions, and document it on our lesson plan for legality. Next, we'll briefly talk about instructional tasks. What are instructional tasks? How do we actually teach our activity to our students? Instructional tasks are the learning components of the lesson that deal with the actual learning. These instructional tasks include demonstrations, right? That's showing the students. Explanations. In PE, instructional tasks such as demonstrations and explanations should be short and efficient to give your students as much time to learn and be active. But PE is a visual learning type activity, so your demonstration is going to be critical. Teaching cues. Teaching cues are those key words. I gave you an example before. Back against the wall, teacher sees all. Our basketball free throw is beef. You might use that teaching cue. Balance, eyes, elbow, and follow through, which is beef. And then feedback is critical. This is where you're really actually coaching or teaching up your students. You're observing them to see what they're doing right, what they're doing incorrectly, and then you're providing corrective instruction to them so they can improve. So this is where the actual teaching and improvement occurs. It's important to remember when you're designing your instruction that two common ways students learn in anything, especially physical education, is observing, which is them watching and seeing, or listening, and that is hearing about how to do it. And observing is more critical in physical education because it's more activity-based, so students need to see it. So, how do we demonstrate and explain different activities? We need to show it and tell it. You might want to tell it first sometimes, but you might want to show it, tell it, and then show it again. So in show it, you need to show the entire skill, both right-handed and left-handed, right-footed, left-footed, if you can do that. You might want to practice. If you have any left-handed students in the class, make sure you show dominant hand and non-dominant hand and use that when you're telling them to do something. We get focused on doing things right-handed. It shouldn't be that way. It should be dominant hand. All right? Show it several times. Show it from different views, maybe a front view, a side view, a back view if necessary. You might do it as a teacher. You might have a student that's an expert that's participated before do it, or you might show a video of somebody doing it. So in basketball, which I use as my example, you might show a video clip of Kobe Bryant or Michael Jordan or Steph Curry or Kevin Durant. All right, somebody that is popular that the students will know as a star. After you show it, you're going to tell it. You'll explain one or two elements of the skill at a time. Usually one in early elementary, maybe two in later elementary, and then you can move to the third or fourth part of the skill. All right, so the next thing I'll show you a graphic on the funnel format. The funnel format is where you start broad. You're just giving them the basics. And then as students learn, you'll give some critical components. All right, there's generally 3 or 4 critical components. The first one is the stance. The next one is the preparatory phase. The third one is the action phase, and the fourth one is the follow-through. The book's going to explain 3 different phases. The stance is generally feet shoulder width apart, knees bent, balanced. That's going to be something popular for most physical activities. All right, then the preparatory phase, if we use our basketball format, that's putting the ball above the elbow with your elbow down and the ball below the chin with your eyes on the rim. The execution phase is where you're actually doing the activity. You're lifting the ball, coming up on your toes and shooting it and releasing it. And then the follow-through is going to be you will snap your wrist, put your top fingers down into the cookie jar, all right, and you will hold your elbow underneath your wrist so you don't have what's called a flying elbow. All right, that would be too much to start off telling an elementary class. So the funnel format, a set shot, you'd list the elements of the skill, the preparation phase, the execution phase, and the follow-through phase. All right, in the preparation, knees bent, balls in front, face the basket, shooting hand under the ball, one hand on the side, cock the wrist. All right, the execution phase is going to be the actual action. And then the follow-through is you're going to look to see at the end where things are. Did you release it with backspin? Did you pull your side hand off the ball slightly? Did you flick your wrist? You might want to just teach the beginning and the end to elementary students, right? If they know where to start and know where to end, then you as the teacher can work on seeing if the middle's right, right? So the task, you narrow it to just a couple things. Bend your knees, cock your wrist, keep your eyes on the basket, extend up and out, and flick your wrist and fingers. Those might be some of your teaching cues. All right? So here they are, the skill element, the teaching cues. All right? So you'll break it down to just a couple critical components, and these are the things you're going to focus on. All right? Getting your stance, get the ball underneath you, cock your wrist, and then as you shoot it, flick your wrist and fingers. So these are the 2 things we would focus on teaching our elementary students how to shoot a basketball. So what are teaching cues? We'll go into a little bit more detail. They are short, catchy, descriptive words or phrases, and they help students retain and perform the activity. They're things you can say that are coaching them during the activity. They provide students with meaningful and relevant ways to remember a technique. They reduce words and they're catchy and help students focus on what's important for them to do. They also allow students or teachers to provide students some meaningful short feedback based on what students already understand. They really provide the whys. What does that mean? Some students learn when they understand why something's done a certain way, or they have a cue to just remember. You can say something and it clicks in their head. And then they help us check for understanding. We might shadow or mirror a student. Students repeat the teacher's action. You might have them say something as they're doing it. Flick wrist, and have them do it. They might echo the teacher saying it. Students could recite what they're supposed to do without even the ball. All right? Students could tell a partner what they're supposed to do. They could stand behind them and watch them shoot and tell them what to do on their thing. while they're performing the activity, right? They may be a question alert. Teacher asks for everybody to show their hands when asking a question and picks on a student to answer it or show it or demonstrate it. Remember, when you're checking for understanding, are there questions is not really an effective assessment technique. Be specific. Show me how to get in a correct stance for basketball. Tell me what the follow through is. Oh, flicking the wrist. Gotcha. So where does the learning occur? The learning occurs during the instructional feedback. This is when students are doing the activity and you're coaching or teaching them up. So in your lesson plan, make sure you have downloaded the lesson plan, downloaded the example lesson plan, and downloaded the template, right? And the instructions, read closely about augmented feedback. It's important to know the difference between knowledge of results and knowledge of performance. Results are actually how things are done. Did they make it or not? Performance is, knowledge of performance is, did they use correct form? All right? So once again, knowledge of results is the information students see or receive from the teacher after the performance. It's the outcome. In shooting the basketball, did the ball go through the basket? Right? In archery, did the arrow hit the target or the bullseye? All right. In throwing or serving, did the ball have backspin or topspin? That's the results. That's what happened. The knowledge of performance is a little bit different. This is where we need to zero in, especially in early learners or elementary. Did they perform the activity with good form? Information students receive about the form of the performance. It can be from the teacher. It could be from a peer if they're watching them and providing them some information. You could videotape them and show them. It might be a question. Did you hold your follow-through correctly? Or it might be the teacher saying you held your follow-through correctly, or correcting them to help them hold their follow-through correctly. When you have early learners, it's important to give some positive feedback, right? It's not usually specific to the results or the performance, but it's such as good job or you're getting better, nice. It's also good to put students' names in there so they actually hear you. Everybody likes to hear their name. This is really good for positive motivation. You could talk about effort, good work, nice try, or characteristics, such as you're providing a lot of hustle, all right? So it's important when you're providing feedback to also consider corrective and specific feedback. When you're going to teach an activity to a new group of learners, think of what could be the hardest thing for them to do. And then how are you going to correct that? If you plan for that before you teach it, when it happens in your teaching, you'll be prepared to help students learn. So have corrective and specific feedback prepared on your lesson plan. This is feedback that helps refine or correct an error in performance. If you're throwing, remember you'll want to have your opposite foot from your dominant hand forward, right? And then as you throw, you would step with your throwing or dominant foot with dominant hand and throw. Some activities you might step with the opposite foot. So if you're going to kick a soccer ball, you will step with the opposite foot and plant first. So make sure you have those things figured out for your activity and you have some corrective and specific feedback planned because you are going to need to do it with early learners. You should also provide informative, evaluative, and instructional feedback for learners. This means you tell the students what they're doing well. On the flip side, you might tell students what they have done incorrectly. So corrective feedback would be make sure you step with the opposite foot. Then they do it right. Good job stepping with that opposite foot. So you could sandwich style these together. You might use both things. Before they're going to perform, make sure you step with the opposite foot, and then as they do it, tell them good job stepping with that opposite foot. That's the sandwich style of feedback, using both styles together. Corrective, informative, and evaluative, and you might even add in some of your motivational feedback in your verbiage. But don't be over verbose. Don't talk too much. Try to give them some short, catchy phrases to help them learn. If you give them too much information, it's information overload for beginning learners. So in feedback delivery, make sure you re-emphasize error correction. You might do that to the specific performer, or if they're working in a group, explain it to the whole group. Or if you see that multiple people are having that error, stop the whole class, explain it to the one performer you were looking at, and then the entire class. So it's a reteaching point. Give group specific feedback. Remember, some call this a response presentation. You're responding to something that was previously demonstrated, but you're going to give it to one performer and a group if they're working in small groups, say at a specific basket. Another important thing that's important in feedback delivery is be mindful, or be understanding, and be observing individual performers. Know what's happening in the entire class, but be specific with your individual performers when you're teaching. All right? That means sometimes giving too much individual feedback diminishes what's going on with the other students. Make sure you see everybody. Look off in the peripheral and kind of be attention to what's going on with everybody else. Talk to students' ears. That means give them verbal prompts and reminders as they're doing it. All right? The teacher verbally reminds students to perform a certain cue. Step with your opposite foot. Hold your follow-through. Flick your wrist. These reminders are not only heard by the individual performer, but generally everybody that can hear you within either the group or the entire class. And then lastly, you have your duty to supervise, so make sure you're monitoring the periphery. That means use your peripheral vision off to the side. Make sure you're seeing what's going on. When the teacher keeps their back to the wall, they see all. All right? So make sure you're seeing everything that's going on. Our next step is, how do we actually provide some additional instruction? We've taught the basic form for a skill. How are we going to provide some application and extension type activities so students can improve and then take the basic skill and possibly be able to use it into a context of an activity, such as a game, or a small-sided game or build-up game? So let's talk about how you progress through content. Extensions are part of the lesson plan. An extension changes the difficulty or the complexity of the task. What does that mean? It means an extension adds some kind of variable or variation to the task. When we teach form, we try to limit the variables. The students are just working on the form. If we want to add some kind of extension to the activity, we might modify the skill. All right? Instead of shooting a set shot or a free throw, we shoot a jump shot. We might modify the space. If our students are really struggling to make any free throws, especially in the elementary, you might have them shoot from 5 foot instead of 15 foot. So you're modifying the space. If you have expert performers in the upper elementary, you might move that back to a 3-pointer. So you're adding space in. You might modify the number of students. All right. If you're starting to play a game, instead of playing 1-on-1, you might now play 2-on-2 or 3-on-3, or have multiple offensive and defensive players. Another thing to do is modify the equipment. You might use a smaller basketball for early performers when you're working on the shot. It's easier for them, due to their strength, to use correct form. Or you might modify the rules. So when you're playing a build-up or lead-up game, you might have different rules. Early basketball performers travel a lot, so you might allow them an extra step or two. Right? So that's a content extension. How do you extend and add the variation to a task? The next thing is, in your progression, is applications. Applications are activities to further develop the skills. That would be using the skill in a more competitive setting. Instead of just saying, how many free throws can you make? How many shots can you make in 30 seconds? All right? Instead of, can you dribble the ball back and down the court and back in between cones, can you do it without losing the ball in 30 seconds? All right? An application might be using a lead-up game. Now can we dribble, pass, and shoot within a game of 3-on-3? Or can we shoot our free throw, go get a rebound, and go shoot another shot in a game of knockout? How do we use these skills in a lead-up game? It could be a game of pig or horse, a keep away or tag type of game. You might use relays, sharks versus minnows. If you do some kind of knockout game, the students that get knocked out should have a separate activity on the side to continue to practice the skill. You shouldn't have games where students get knocked out or tagged out and they sit and watch. That takes away from your learning activities. You might modify games. If you're playing volleyball, you might allow the volleyball to bounce once. You might use a beach ball to start out with. If you're playing soccer, you might have multiple goals and have 3 teams playing and 3 or 4 balls out there to allow students to shoot in different goals. All right, let's talk about our practice consideration. What is closed versus open skill practice? Closed skill practice is when you first start learning a skill. You've just demonstrated it and explained it. This is where skills are performed in a predictable environment. There's very few variables. This could be shooting a free throw. All right. In open skill practice, there's more variables. It could be shooting a jump shot or shooting a shot with defense. All right. So in closed skill practice, there's limited or no variables. If you're learning to hit a ball, it might be starting off hitting the ball off of a tee. An open skill practice is where you start adding in variables. Things are performed in a changing, challenging, unpredictable environment. You might add in the variable now of defense on a basketball shot. All right. You might add in now that a coach tosses the ball to you to hit it instead of hitting it off of a tee. Right? If you're teaching somebody how to catch a fly ball, in a closed skill practice, the coach will toss the fly ball to where they're standing. In an open skill practice, the coach will toss a fly ball where the students have to now run and get under it and then use the correct form to catch a fly ball. It could also be adding in variables such as teammates, defense, or starting to get into a build-up game where you're adding in movement. This could be more of a game situation. You might start off in your open skill practice by tossing the fly ball and making a student run under it and get it. And then when you're adding in more variables, you might toss the fly ball, have a student run under it, catch it, and then throw to a certain base depending on the runner. Remember, it's critical that you initially teach skills in a closed skill setting. Students practice the skill, practice the form, really work on their performance, not the results, and then you build your sequence of activities to work towards your assessment or work towards using the activity in an open skilled situation. So you always teach basic skills and then gradually move them into some kind of game or competitive type environment. So let's talk about some other practice considerations, the whole versus part method. Do you practice the whole skill or parts? It's important to think of 2 things, your skill complexity and your skill organization. Skills with many complex parts may best be taught in parts. All right? A basketball layup, a volleyball spike, a basketball shot, the breaststroke, and swimming. Those are complex skills that probably need to be taught in parts. Skills that really rely on rhythm, such as shooting an arrow or stepping in and shooting a jump shot, it's hard to stop each part, and you might use a forward roll, such as an example. You'll still explain the parts, but you're going to allow students to do the whole thing because of the rhythm, timing, or the speed that's needed to execute the activity needing to be taught as a whole. The last practice consideration we'll discuss today is, how do you do this? Is it massed versus distributed practice? Mass practice means there are longer bouts of skill repetitions practiced in fewer lessons. We're going to practice this all day, today and tomorrow, and then you probably don't even practice it again. Distributed practice is shorter bouts of skill repetitions practiced over more lessons. We're going to practice this the first 5 minutes of class each day of this week. So shorter and more frequent still practice is preferred method to practice throughout an instructional unit. All right. Distributed practice settings have been shown to be a better choice for learning development. That's why skills should be reviewed and practiced each lesson, even if it's only short periods of time. All right. When I teach a volleyball unit, the most important thing in volleyball is if you can't get the serve in, it's really hard to ever play a game as you're building up to a game. So we will teach the serve on the first day of the volleyball unit, but we will spend time practicing the serve every day. So next, we will talk about teaching styles, and this will be the last segment of our lesson planning part 1 video. All right. So in teaching styles, there are 4 different styles we'll talk about. There's the command style. This is the direct style of presentation. This is good to use in an elementary classroom, and it's usually critical to use in the beginning stages of learning. This is where the teacher is in charge. Students watch the teacher, they watch the demonstration and explanation, and they pay close attention to the teacher. It's very good for control and safety and introducing some kind of new activity to the class. The next style is the practice style. This is where students have some kind of choice within teacher-directed tasks. This is where you tell students to dribble the basketball, all right? Work on some kind of advanced dribbling technique, such as a crossover or between the legs or behind the back. And the teacher is walking around watching the students practice, all right? You might provide stations for students to learn. So there's a poster or card outlining the task, and when they're in each specific station, they'll be doing a different task, and the teacher can monitor and provide corrective feedback as they see it necessary. In a basketball unit, this could be one goal they're working on shooting free throws, one goal they're working on shooting layups, another area they're working on dribbling, right? And they go around to the different stations within an activity. This is really good, especially if you have only 2 goals. You don't want to have students sitting and watching one or two students shoot. You can have other stations for them to rotate. The teacher will designate the time limit or provide a whistle or a command to move to each station. The next 2 styles are the reciprocal style and the guided discovery style. These styles are used later on in a lesson or for upper level elementary students. This is where if a peer is an expert performer in their group, they can help teach the skills or task or rules to the performers that are struggling. All right. So you might put the students into groups and allow them to provide feedback or coach up their students within their specific group. This is where peer coaching, peer assessment, peer feedback comes into play. The expert student is reciprocating or mirroring what the teacher does with the rest of their team. All right, you might have to designate a captain, or you might have them just with partners and they take turns providing coaching points to each other. This is really great in the cognitive level of learning. If they understand how to peer coach, they start understanding the activity better, and usually their performance improves as well. The last style we'll discuss today is the guided discovery style. This is teacher-directed activities that guide students to answering a question. That's such as how to do a skill correctly. You might provide very few rules and then let students determine their strategies and tactics in some kind of game. The guided discovery example is have students practice various ways of doing a long jump to determine how they jump the farthest. Is it a broad jump? Can they take a step? Can they run up to it? All right, that might be the guided discovery way to figure out the best way to do a long jump. You might allow some kind of keep away or invasion or capture the flag game, and the students pick their own strategies or tactics on how they're going to try to win these type of games. You provide the context or the basic rules, and students discover their own style throughout the learning. This is great for cognitive level learning and team building. So in your lesson plan, It's important to remember the lesson plan document as a planning tool that teachers use to outline a scope and sequence of learning experiences. What does that mean? That means what are you teaching? How broad is it? The tactics you're teaching, that's the scope. And then how are you going to teach it? You're going to explain it, demonstrate it, provide a closed variable type of setting to an open style to a game type setting. So that's your sequence, the order of learning experiences. So a lesson plan for our class, I'm going to give you a format to use, but in each school, the school or district might give you a template or allow you to use your own lesson planning tool. So lesson planning is going to be different, and your lesson plan document is going to be different based on where you teach. All right? An important section of the lesson plan is detailing the performance objective or objectives of the lesson. This section includes your lesson, your performance objective, and then you'll go into things such as grade level expectations or essential questions. Those are all things you'll learn later and depending on your school district. So lesson plans detail various parts of the lesson, including the instructional sequence of activities, how you might assess students, or what you might do to adapt activities for your students that are struggling or expert performers. And we will go over assessments and adaptations in one of our following video lectures. And remember, it's a form of legal written evidence of instruction. You're proving that you're planning your lesson to your evaluator or administrator or principal, and if something occurs where a student may get injured, you can show that you explained the safety to the equipment. All right, make sure if you haven't yet, you've downloaded your lesson plan instructions, your lesson plan example, and your lesson plan template, and start filling in that information with the activities as we go through this video lecture and the video lecture for the next module, Lesson Planning Part 2. All right, you can always replay this video, rewind it, go back and take notes, but make sure you go back to your module page 1 and read over your activities for this lesson, this module, and go ahead and complete those. This information, along with the textbook reading, should help you complete the activities. Make sure you read your feedback as well, because at the end of this unit, the culminating activity is to develop a well-written, detailed lesson plan based on the information from modules 9, 10, 11, and 12. Have a great day. If you have any questions, send me an email and I'll follow up with you. Good luck on your activities, and really pick some kind of specific activity you want to teach and enjoy the process of doing this and learning how to apply the skill of planning a lesson for elementary physical education instruction. Have a great day. We'll see you next time.